Well, welcome to another Monday night workshop. Who's here for the first time? Let's check that out. Excellent. Let's give them a hand. Woo! Who's here for the last time? Okay. Thanks for coming out. I know we're getting close to the holidays and most people are not thinking about Omega and workshops. So this workshop I actually had was going to present 2 weeks ago, but was unable to do it. So I've really had a chore and a half to put this together. So before I begin, let me just mention our announcements. We have an Omega 1 starting in 2 weeks. That's December 5th to the 8th. That'll be the last Omega this year. So if you have any friends, loved ones you'd like to send through, or if you want to be tortured again, please by all means come back. We have an impact training on the 14th of December. That will be me. It'll be the third meditation. I've been doing a series of meditations, so it'll be the third one. You don't have to come through the first two. It's fine. We just review meditation, and I've actually been quite amazed at how many different meditation types I've been exposed to. So that's what I've just been introducing the group to. Our next Monday night workshop will be December 2nd. And it will be a follow-up to this one. This is based on the secrets of the Polymath. And then, of course, I haven't announced this yet, but we are doing our New Year's Day program. Last year, we switched from New Year's Eve to New Year's Day because, the idea of people driving at night wasn't really we want people to get home safe. So we switched it to New Year's Day, which it was a brunch. It was a potluck brunch. It was kind of nice. There was about 50 people, maybe 60 last year. There was a bunch of us meandering about. So on the New Year's Day, I always do a presentation of the numbers following George's thing. That's what he would do, is always introduce the numbers for the year. So next year is 2014, so that will be a 6. Is that correct? No, 7. It'll be a 7. 2014, 0, 5, 7. It will be a 7. Starbucks break. No, I'm kidding. Tonight's message is brought to you by Starbucks. Anyway, that will be in December. And then I've been announcing this. I've been working on Omega 8, so hopefully I will have that to present next year. It's going to be unlike anything that we've done yet. That's what we said about Omega 4, so I have to top that one. I don't know if I'm doing a good enough job on that, but I am. January's Omega 1 is January 9th through the 12th, and then there's an Omega 2 in January, which is the 23rd to the 26th. That takes care of all of our announcements. So yes, sir.
Sorry to bother you. I was just wondering about the meditation. When you meditate, I didn't fully understand all the colors. Should you meditate one color at a time and then advance, or is it something that is
one color at a time to advance? Did you do Omega 1? You didn't do Omega 2 yet, right?
No.
Okay. So you just do one color at a time to advance, and what you're really doing is just how do I say it? Like you're ringing a bell and calling to attention. So the red is the physical level, so you're calling the attention to your physical. Then the next one is orange, that's your emotional, so you're calling attention to your emotional. Then yellow is mental, green is intuitive, blue is atman, which is love, purple is monad, which is the oneness, and violet is divine. So you do them one at a time all the way through, but you do them quite quickly if you want to. Yeah, so there's really no timing on it. It depends on how you feel. If you feel like you can go through the colors that fast, that's fine. If you get stuck on a specific color, usually that means there's something going on in your life on that level. How's that?
That helped me a lot.
Excellent. Any other questions before I proceed on? My phone had a question for me. I was thinking. So then let me just start with this. This topic is called The Secrets of the Polymath. How many people know what a polymath is? I mean, I already put that in the newsletter, but so tell me what a polymath is. Remind me of your name, please. I can't.
Dana.
Dana, thank you. So Dana, what's a polymath?
If I understand it properly, it's a person who has many different, genres or something that they're expert, or not. I don't know if expert, but they're pretty good at it.
They excel in many different areas of their life. That's a good definition of it. Okay. So when I first started looking at polymath, I actually was doing some research on Walter Russell, who was considered to be an American, one of the most recent polymaths of our time. And the word polymath was used to describe him, and I thought, I've never heard that word, so I went and looked it up, and sure enough, that's what it was. And then one word led me to another, and before I knew it, I had this list of polymaths, which was unbelievable to me. So my thought process was, I wonder if I could connect all the polymaths to see if there was a common thread. So I wondered if, for example, who did I go to? Aristotle was the Greek philosopher who studied under Plato. So I wondered if maybe Plato had a teacher, and then Aristotle passed it down. So I wondered if I could thread the connection through to all the polymaths. I couldn't. I tried. Not all of them are philosophers. I was quite surprised about this. What I did, though, I discovered an incredible array of information. Now, being a bit of a geek, this was really fun for me because I got to research a bunch of stuff that I probably won't ever use again. No, I'm kidding. I actually said to Mark this morning that, this would actually make a pretty good thesis or a PhD application. If I could put all this together, I think that would be really something I'd like to do. But what I did was I decided to go through and ended up just describing several polymaths, and because I ran out of time, what I wanted to do is introduce you to a couple today. And what I did was, because there's so many out there, I limited my list down to people who excelled in at least a minimum of 5 fields. So they had to do at least 5 things. If it was only 4, it didn't mean that they weren't a polymath. I just excluded from the list. As I said, I was trying to connect them when I first put them together. In my list, I actually came up with, here, it's back here. I have 47. I came up with 47 names, and I only know 10. And I don't know them, I just recognize 10 of the names. So that was very intriguing to me, to know that here's a bunch of people whose names have long since gone, and yet they've made contributions. And what crossed my mind was, I wonder if that's what will happen to us. Nobody will remember us, but there'll be a contribution, which I'm assuming naturally will be a progression, if that tends to be the truth here. Although some of these names, of course, Copernicus, almost everybody knows Copernicus, and Michelangelo. Although the intriguing thing for me when I looked at Michelangelo, I really thought that was his first and last name. It's not. Michelangelo's name is Michelangelo di Lovidico Bornatini Simeoni. Are you kidding me? That's like he's got as many names as I do. I was really surprised about that, because I was going through the list and I said, Mark, Michelangelo should be on here. Where is he? And I'm looking, and then I realized it was just his first name. Michelangelo is just his first name. Anyway, let me start at the very beginning when I began my little path here. So a polymath. The definition, I went to several books to define this. Most books just said somebody who is an expertise in more than one thing. The one that I found that had a good definition was, a polymath is a Greek word meaning having learned much, is a person whose expertise spans a significant number of different subject areas. Such a person is known to draw on the complex bodies of knowledge to solve specific problems. And that's really what I went with. I went with somebody who spanned more than 5 different areas. So if you were a poet and a writer and a composer, I didn't count those, because I figured they all were under literary. So what I did was I went with people who were a physician, an astrologer, a chemist. Like, I went with really vast different fields. That's the list I went with. So this isn't like the all-seeing list. This is just my list. And as I said, what I wanted to do was see if I could connect them, find a common thread. I did, but I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. So what I did was, though, once I discovered what a polymath is, I started researching and seeing how many other people have used or spoke about polymaths. And as a matter of fact, apparently in one of the Bones episodes, Bones said the word polymath, and somebody went and looked it up, because on the dictionary it says, why are you looking up this word? And people make little comments. I didn't know you could do that. And I read one of the little comments, and she said, oh, Bones said it, so I didn't know what it was, so I looked it up. I was like, that's funny. So at least it's being out there. The thing I looked for, though, was if we had a common day or a more recent polymath. And on one of the lists that I looked up, it was the comedian Jamie Foxx. I think that's him, the guy that played Ray. So they called him a polymath because he was a singer, a songwriter, played the piano, an actor, and a comedian. I didn't count that as a polymath because to me that's all entertainment except for the piano, but like the singer and the writer, songwriter went together. But anyway, I was surprised about that, to see that Jamie Foxx made a list. Not that that's wrong, it just, I was looking for philosophers, and I didn't see Jamie Foxx as a philosopher. I mean, maybe. One of the articles I looked at was Intelligent Life, and in their magazine, as a matter of fact, right up, they had an article that said the decline of polymaths, which I thought was very intriguing. The author, his name was Edward Carr. He said that in this age of specialization, the polymath has become an endangered species. And I think that's true. We specialize in one area rather than having a well-rounded expertise. So I thought back to my college days. I remember the kids that were having liberal arts as their major, like they were the ones that got made fun of the most. But yet, they probably were the most well-rounded because they did lots of many different subjects, as opposed to us that were just funneled into one little subject. I was thinking of, I want to get ahead of myself. I am aware that in today's day and age, there's less people with multiple areas of expertise. It doesn't seem to be quite common nowadays. So it made me naturally think of George. Many of you don't know, I would consider him a polymath. So I thought I'd give you a little brief introduction to George's life. At the age of 15, he was enrolled in semi-professional baseball. At 15, he was brought into one step below the major leagues. He was in semi-pro at 15. He was a catcher, and there was a pitcher, and I cannot remember the pitcher's name for the life of me. I tried to remember it today. But there was a pitcher that the two of them were just so dynamic. He read this man, he would tell me stories about this, that he could tell what the pitcher was going to throw. He didn't do the signals, they just had a good connection, and they were a really good team. Well, they both enlisted in the Air Force, and the pitcher lost his arm. So George stopped playing baseball. He just felt like he was going to betray the guy, I guess. Well, anyway, when George went into the Air Force at the age of 17, he lied about his age and got into the Air Force. He became an expert in electronics. He actually was self-taught. Before he went, he'd get the schools, they would send the books to your house and you would do homeschooling. He would homeschool himself on electronics. And then when he got into the Air Force, he furthered his career in that. In his 20s, once he graduated or got out of the Air Force, so here he is already in 2 careers by the time he's 20. By the time he's 20 now, he goes into his 3rd career, which is a Southern Baptist minister. He was there for quite some time, and amazingly, in his 4th year in the church school, in his 4th year of college, they sent him up to Page, Arizona to build and start an organization up there, a congregation up there. So unskilled, he designed, architect, and constructed a church. He had people help up there because there was a lot of construction workers. They were building the Glen Cove Dam back then, but he pretty much did most of it. I took him up there one time. It was very funny. He went right up to this one corner of the building and pointed out this brick and said how he had the hardest time because this one brick had broke, and he showed me what they had to do to get that. But I thought that was very intriguing that he could remember a story like that. And then he took me around to the back and showed me how they had problems getting the air conditioner up, so they had to cut into the roof to get it around. It was very funny. So I took him up there, maybe 15 years ago. I think the church is still standing. The last time I heard somebody said it's still standing. What's funny is if you've ever been to Page, they have a street that all the churches are on. It's called Church Row. And all the street, it's nothing but churches, one after the other after the other. The entire street is just a collection of church. And then there's no other churches in town. And so, if one's packed, just go to next door. You just go down the line. It was funny. But anyway, so he built a church in his 20s. And then in his 30s, that's when he began to search for knowledge. When he walked away from the church, he started searching for ageless wisdom because he knew he couldn't believe in a God that believed in the lake of fire for all eternity. He believed in something that had to be forgiving and compassionate. And so he walked away knowing that he was going to die from lightning as soon as he stepped off the grass. He knew for certain that was going to happen. And he often would say that about 2-3 years he kept looking over his back to make sure that nothing bad was going to happen because he walked away from the church. When he came down to Phoenix, he held a variety of jobs, but mostly he immersed himself in the Ageless Wisdom teachings. He started this business, Papago Printing. Didn't know anything about a printing company, but he bought the printing company because at this time, through his teachings, he started doing writing, and he would start printing what he wrote and sending it out to people. And the woman who was printing it was this little printing company in her garage kind of thing. She sold it to him, a printing company, for $1,000. So he bought this building, and then became a printer. Knew nothing about printing and taught himself from the beginning stages all the way up. But he said he didn't have a dream to be a printer. He did it because he wanted to print his material and mail it out. So he wanted to be a publisher, and he ended up being a printer and publisher. He did publish some of his stuff here too. Well, all of his study groups, Papago Printing printed out his book. Papago Printing printed it for him. So he did a printing company. He also, many people do not know this, he was an avid photographer. In his printing company, he actually built a darkroom. It used to be over in the section where the gift shop is. He had his own little darkroom, and he had the old-fashioned cameras with the light things and I saw one of his cameras one time. I'm like, I want my Nikon. Everything's automatic. It's just press, and it gives me a nice picture. He had it all out. He had a great photographer. He was a painter. Some of you don't know that, but he is a painter. I actually have one of his original paintings. And he also played the guitar, avidly played the guitar. That was one of the sad things that he missed with Parkinson's. He couldn't bend his fingers anymore, so he didn't play the guitar anymore. So, I would say that constitutes a polymath, a philosopher. He spanned many different levels. Now, what I thought about was, is it just enough to span different areas, or can you be an expertise in it? I would say he was a pretty good expertise in philosophy. He wasn't, well, no, he was self-taught on guitar too. He was pretty good on the guitar. Photography was pretty good. I think he was, but I'm not sure an expertise in all areas. But that's an illustration of a polymath. And then I thought about me. Well, I could be considered a polymath. You could be considered a polymath. I'm sure we've done more than 5 things in our lives, according to my criteria. More than 5 things in our lives. So, I mean, up until recently, I've always had 2 jobs. Always. It just never occurred to me just to have one. I'm a workaholic. I like to work. So I would always have 2 jobs. And right off the bat, when I moved to Arizona, I played on 3 softball teams because I love softball. 2 jobs and played on 3 softball teams. I was very active back then. Can you call an alcoholic part of a science? No. I don't think so. College? So I thought about the different things that I've done as well, and I could consider myself a polymath, but I don't think I've excelled in anything. So when I was looking through all of these great philosophers, the question I asked myself was, why am I compelled to read about certain people, but others I wasn't? I would start researching some of them, and I'd go, oh, that's interesting, and then move on quickly. And then some of them I went, oh, wow, and I really did spend a great deal of time researching them and finding out what their position is. I think what really captured my attention was what captures my attention. So I'm a philosopher. I would rather read about the philosophers. The engineers and the really heavy scientists, okay, that's nice, not really appealing to me. So I think what I did was drift towards the people that I connected with or knew about. What I ended up doing, as I said, I was searching for a theme of trying to link them all together. I found one, but it's not the theme that I was looking for. So here's what I wanted to do, was introduce you to a list of polymaths. Now, this might be a little overwhelming, so I'm going to just do them one at a time and just briefly talk about it. I also brought up some of my treasure books that George left me. They're actually called The Treasure of Philosophy, and it has little tidbits and actual pieces of some of the individuals. What I started doing when I was looking through the list, I was quite surprised that it wasn't until the third person of a polymath that was a philosopher. The very first polymath ever recorded in history, his name is Imhotep. He's Egyptian. So he was born around 2650 BC. But it says the circa, that's like a different thing. So it's actually circa 2650 BC. He was considered the chancellor of the king of Egypt, so he was the king of Egypt's side man. He was a doctor. He was the administrator of the palace, a nobleman, a high priest, a builder, a chef, a carpenter, a chief sculptor, a maker of vases, a poet, and a philosopher. The thing about him, though, is he was considered to be the very first doctor ever recorded. He was also the very first, what's here? So, his name is He Who Comes in Peace. He is considered the first architect, the first engineer, and the first physician in early history. Even after his death, he was just a common man, but he was elevated to like the king status because of his contributions. It was intriguing, though, in the encyclopedia, one of the encyclopedias I looked at, an actual encyclopedia, it only had about a quarter of a page listed on him. The Britannica had just about maybe a half a page, not much more. And on the internet, Wikipedia, I didn't really find much more, and nowhere in there was philosophy. So that's where I got disappointed. I thought every polymath was going to be a philosopher. They're not. So my first one, the first one to come to, which I love the Egyptian culture anyway, was an Egyptian, Imhotep. Imhotep. The next one is Archimedes. He was a Greek mathematician, physicist, engineer, inventor, and astronomer. And if you knew anything about the Greeks actually created astronomy and astrology. Those were considered sciences. Astrology today, unfortunately, is considered more New Age, tell me what the stars are saying. But back then, astrology was the way you planted your crops, was according to astrology. The way that you married or bought and sold things. As a matter of fact, the Farmer's Almanac was based upon astrology from olden times. What's that circle in England with the stone? Stonehenge, thank you. That's all based upon astrology as well. Did you see the picture I'm looking at, the circle of stones? All of that that's considered astrology. So astrology was a science up until recently. So was numerology. Numerology was a science up until recently. Now it's more about, parlor games rather than, wow, the benefits of changing a number in a letter, which is a whole nother area that I'm not going to go into. So Aristotle, the very first polymath that I came across, that was a philosopher. Aristotle, which I was quite surprised, I thought I knew a lot about him and I didn't. He was considered to be one of the most all-time polymaths of ever. He was considered to be the most intelligent human being so far, to date, the most intelligent human being who graced this planet. He knew everything about anything, and many of the sciences he actually enhanced. He was, he was a student of Plato. He taught Alexander the Great, so he was his tutor. He is fields of expertise, so this wasn't just something he dabbled in. He actually was an expert in these fields. Physics, metaphysics, which means beyond physics, not the term that we have today. Poetry, theater, music, logic, rhetoric, politics, ethics, biology, and zoology. Those were he were experts in. He dabbled in every other field, but he was an expert here. As I said, he's considered to be one of the great polymaths of all time. So I'm going to stop because I know I did some research on him. Let's see. So he had an extraordinary life. When he was 17 years old, that's when he became a pupil of Plato. And he was in the academia in Athens. Plato's, not college, but Plato's college. He studied with Plato. He left the academy at 37, only after Plato died. And it was said that he left because he was displeased at the direction that the academy was going in. It was going more towards mathematicians and less towards philosophy. And he thought philosophy should have the same equal weight. So that was his one reason for leaving. He was a tutor of Alexander the Great, as I said. Alexander was just 13 years old when his father hired Aristotle to tutor his son, and as a result of this, he was well connected then. So he had a passion for biology and zoology, and what Alexander did was because he loved his master so much, he erected a library and a museum for Aristotle in Alexandria. And all of their resources, whatever he wanted, he got. So it was amazing how much this gentleman did. He taught, he wrote over 400 separate treatises, which that's like a book. Back then they called them treatises. He wrote over 400 treatises. His most notable was the, I'm going to butcher this name, the Nico-Machian Ethics. It's his most notable. Apparently you all know it too, right? Had to look it up. It's actually his philosophy. He broke his philosophy into different types of philosophy, and ethics was considered a subtopic. So this was based upon ethics. So what I did was, in my little books here, I went to the idea of Aristotle. How many people in here know who Aristotle, or know of Aristotle? Yeah, almost everyone's heard it, let's say. Has anybody heard Aristotle? So he, let's see, there's so much. I love the smell of books, sorry. Here, the process of change is one thing that he often talked about. There's so many great writings in here. I just want to, everything which comes into being is brought about by something. Now I know that makes sense to us, but back then, nobody thought about things like this. So he was the initiator of this. By source from which is generating. Actually have a couple of his quotes, I'm not going to mention them right now. But he, in his ethics book, talked mostly about the idea that to achieve a virtuous and potentially happy character requires first the stage of having fortune to be habituated, not deliberately, but by teachers and experience. So in other words, he was of the idea, anything that we have, it's a result of habit. Discipline is a result of habit. If you want to lose weight, that's a habit that you have to put yourself in. If you want to work out, that's a habit. If you want to educate your mind, that's a habit. So he was of the philosophy that if you wanted anything in life, you just had to put it into habit. And in that habit, it would occur. So his thought was, it wasn't self-imposed, but that you also had a teacher who consciously worked with you and gave you assignments to expand your capacity. He said this would lead to a later state in life where one consciously chooses to do the best things. In other words, now that you understand this, what's the best option? What's the virtuous option? The right or ethical thing to do. In that aspect, when the best people come into their lives with their best intention, their best foot forward, their practical wisdom and their intellect can develop into the highest possible virtue, the wisdom of an accomplished theoretical or speculative thinker, or in other words, a philosopher. So according to Aristotle, the greatest thing that you can do is become a philosopher. Can you turn the air on? It's pretty warm in here. Thanks. So with that, I thought that was quite amazing and intriguing, that the best thing that I can do is to become a philosopher. So what I'd like you to do is find somebody that you do not know, or sit with somebody, it doesn't matter, but have a little chit-chat about Aristotle and the idea that the best thing you can do is become a philosopher. All right, if I can have your attention, I'm just going to interrupt you, just keep the energy moving and not me just yapping at you all night. How many people know who Galileo is? What did Galileo do? Astronomer? Is that all we know him for? Most of us, that was Copernicus. Copernicus came up with the Earth revolves around the sun, but, I'm sorry, Copernicus was the one who thought that the sun revolved around the Earth, and I think Galileo was the one who was support of Copernicism. But he was actually a physicist, a mathematician, and a philosopher. He was not on my list, but I wanted to mention him because I would consider him to be a great contribution. He's often considered the father of the modern observational astronomy because he came up with the telescope. That's his major invention, was the telescope. Not major, but that's one of his inventions. He's also the father of physics, the father of science. All of that is considered him. I would have never got that. I thought it was just the dude with the telescope and it was the I spyglass thing that you always see on whenever you watch a new movie, you see that spyglass. I always think about Galileo on that one. And sometimes I actually go, Galileo. Anyway, so he I would consider to be a good polymath, even though only 4 of the definitions that he has here. He was born in 1564. So then I wanted to make mention of him because I know I didn't put him in here, but then there's somebody else that I didn't put in here. How many people know who Pythagoras is? What's he famous for? Mathematician and a theorist? That's not all. He actually, where is he? Do I have him quickly here? I've got him right here. So he had become a legendary figure, ancient, distinguished, general assessment. Pythagoras was regarded the initiator of mathematical demonstration and deduction. He also was a philosopher, a musician. He worked with numbers, numerology, science and religion, mysticism, and metaphysicians. The Pythagoras, what he ended up coming with, he came up, which is something that a lot of people still to this day quote, rules of conduct on how to be a better citizen. So he had this, and that's how big it is. It's rules of conduct. That's what I'm not going to read through the whole thing. But that was his one contribution. So here's a mathematician, and he comes up with a philosophical rules of conduct, and that's one of the things that he's noted for. So again, another individual that I did not count in my rankings. So I want to go through a couple more because some of these are just absolutely amazing to me, and I wanted to just nod to them. There was this woman, her name was Hypatia, Hypatia. She was born around 350 AD and lived until 415 AD. She was a Greek mathematician who actually ran Plato's academy long after Plato deceased. She was one of the ones in charge of the academy. She lived in Egypt, and this is amazing to me. She was killed by a Christian mob. So naturally, I had to figure that out because, Christians are so, we don't kill anybody. So says the Pope. Sorry.
Pope's not a Christian.
I know, I'm kidding. So, but it always makes me amazed that the Christians were the ones who were massacred for being Christian, and then they end up killing people for not being Christians. I find that ironic in history. Anyway, she was in Alexandria. She was a philosopher in Egypt, well known for mathematicians. She was in the Platonist school in Alexandria. So she was a mathematician, a philosopher, and an astronomer. She belonged to the mathematician tradition of Democritus, who also was a Platonist thinker. I'm just throwing things out to you, it doesn't really matter. But anyway, she taught. She was held in high regards. She was often found conversing, and in the Plato school, she taught people of all. You didn't have to be a Platonism. You could have been of any sect, any creed, any color, didn't matter. The story that I discovered about her, there's several scenarios, but there was this one story that seems to be the most accurate. What had happened, there was 2 people who were fighting. There was the governor of Alexandria and the bishop of Alexandria. So you have religion versus politics. What a concept. And they were fighting. There was something that they were having an argument over. Oh, I know what it was. The Jewish tradition had this one holiday that they danced in the streets. The governor, his name was the governor, didn't like it, so he pronounced a creed and said, no, there won't be any dancing in the streets. The bishop said that we couldn't do that, so they fought back and forth. It was the governor who collected all of the Jewish people and pulled them out of Alexandria, stripped them of all of their possessions, and kicked them out into exile, and then let the rest of the citizens pillage their belongings. The bishop said that's not appropriate, so back and forth they went. Well, apparently, the bishop tried several times to reconcile peacefully. He tried to peacefully say, all right, that's it. Apparently there's lots of wars going on, and lots of little groups were getting involved. Well, there was this one collection of monks that were very fiery monks, and so they went to town in Alexandria, and the governor, the guy whose name begins with an O, was in a chariot, and his group of people were around him. Well, the monks started throwing rocks and bricks and trying to kill the governor. The monks are trying to kill the governor. The governor's military support fled because they were afraid for their lives. So it was actually people in Alexandria that came and rescued the governor. So that's one part of the story. Then what the monks did was they heard that Hypatia, the woman, was asked to be of counsel to the governor. He often sought counsel for her and asked her what his opinions to be and swayed. So she was brought in. Well, the monks spread the rumors that this woman was telling the governor not to reconcile, which was not true. She was talking to both of them, trying to get them both to reconcile peacefully, no bloodshed and whatnot. So the monks determined her to be the bad guy. So in the middle of the night, they kidnapped her, dragged her, who knows where, to some temple, stripped her, tortured her. And the way they tortured her is they stripped her flesh off of her bones with oyster shells. I don't know where people come up with stuff like this. So apparently they bludgeoned her with the tiles, and then when she wasn't dead, they stripped her skin off of her to just, you're not worthy of having skin apparently, then mutilated her and burned her body. All because the rumor was started that she was trying to sway one politician over the other. So that to me is just horrendous. But I thought, wow, there's another story of a polymath or someone making a contribution who dies in misery. Manly P. Hall has a whole list of individuals who've given their lives to humanity only to die a miserable death. So there's a whole list of them. So I would say she would go on one of those lists. There's a gentleman who I do mention in the paper, but I'm going to bring it up to you now because I think he's quite intriguing. His name, I'm not even going to try to pronounce. It's Arabic. It's Jabiribinhayyan. Anybody? They call him Gerber. So we're just going to go with, oh no, it's Geber. 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 Huh?
It's called
G. Jihad. I keep not wanting to say jihad, but he was Persian and Muslim. He was in 721 AD, a Muslim chemist, alchemist, astronomer, engineer, pharmacist, physician, philosopher, physicist, and scientist. He wrote over 300 books on philosophy alone. He wrote 1,300 books on mechanical devices, military machines, and hundreds of books on alchemy. Now, the thing that's intriguing about him, I remember George used to talk about this, that sometimes people would change. Jesus talked in parables so that not everybody would understand it. It would only fall on the ears that would comprehend it. The knights, the Rosicrucians did the same thing because in those times, the temples, the knights, the Templars would be crucified because they became more powerful than the king. So the Knights Templar spoke in rhymes that not everyone could understand. Well, this gentleman did the same thing. His material is often considered gibberish to a common mind, but those who studied under him knew exactly what he was talking about. So the thing that I found intriguing is he has 112 books dedicated to just one version of the Emerald Tablet. Now, if you know anything about anybody know the Emerald Tablet? This is the one specific thing that is a credit to Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes Trismegistus, now remember, he lived in ancient Egypt. The Emerald Tablet is a tablet, a stone, completely comprised of emerald. It's solid emerald. And it is not embossed. What's the other word? It's
Engraved?
not etched, not engraved. It's oh crap, I'm gonna have to look it up now. It's
Or the raised letters?
raised letters. Is that?
Awesome.
I'm gonna have to look it up. Emerald tablet. Sorry, it's the Emerald Tablet. It is Emerald Tablet. Look, I got Wi-Fi back here. I know this word, and I'm going to be so upset that I don't. It's a tablet that was, the way that it was designed, they didn't have the science to do it back then. Inlaid. It may have been inlaid. Here's your name. tablet, translation. It might be embossed, but no, it's where the letters are raised up. Is that embossed? Yeah, Doyle, that's right, that's embossed. So it's the letters are raised up, secret printed, highly recommended. I'm looking through this, I'm probably going to say this wrong. Whatever it was, they didn't have the technology to do it back then, so he had it. And it's just a chunk of emerald that had the teachings, Ageless Wisdom teachings on them, but was written in a way that you could not understand it. So this other gentleman had 112 books based just upon the emerald tablets. So that to me is amazing. He also had 70 books which were translated during the Middle Ages, and they were called the Book of Stones and the Book of Venus. 10 books on rectification describing the alchemies of Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And then he had a whole section of books called the Books of Balance, which is on the balance of nature and the theory of nature. So he really went through a whole bunch of different sciences and really excelled in many of them. He's often considered, as I said, most of his stuff is considered gibberish because it didn't make any sense, but to those who can understand them, he wrote in symbols, which a lot of, I want to say the word Freemasons, but it's before Freemasons. He wrote in symbols where a lot of the alchemists would write in symbols. They draw plates is what they used to have, and they just draw symbols, and that's how they teach from one student to the next. So he was, I found, very worthy, informative individual. Another individual I came up with, which I cannot say, his name is IBN again, Al-Haytham. He was an Iraqi scientist from 965, and he died in 1039. He was an Iraqi scientist, physicist, autonomist, physician, psychologist, astronomer, engineer, inventor, mathematician, ophthalmologist, philosopher, and theologian. Now that's a mouthful. This man is considered to be the first to formulate the scientific method. I guess it's called Alhazen's method, which combines mathematics, induction, observation, and experimentation. So the way that we do science today is based upon what this gentleman did. It's the scientific method. Finding proof. You know, you do an experiment and proof. He's the one who created that. And that was in, he died in 1039. So we haven't even reached, that's just the first century now? Or we're in the second century, just about the second century. He was an individual I thought was noteworthy, thank you. Another one was Copernicus. How many people know Copernicus? Know of the name. What did he do? Steve said that we know the name, but we don't know what he did.
The astrology too.
Copernicus was an astronomer. He's the one who formulated the idea that the Earth spins and the sun revolves around the Earth. No, I'm sorry, where the Earth spins and revolves around the sun. He said the Earth revolves around the sun. He's the one who referred to as the Copernican revolution. And then it says, no pun intended, get it, revolution. That took me a while to figure that one out. He was a Polish Renaissance, yay. He was a Polish Renaissance astronomer, mathematician, physician, artist, classical scholar, a translator, economist, governor, military leader, and diplomat. I had no idea he was a military leader. That surprises me. I just remember him from astrology. Copernicus was the gentleman who put the opposites of what it was, where everyone thought the sun spun around the Earth. He changed it around so that the Earth spins around the sun. So he is very noteworthy. Another person who I did not name is, Gottfried Leibniz. I should do it in the language that they are, German. He's a German philosopher, logician, mathematician, scientist, historian, and mechanics. Now the reason why I'm mentioning him is because he invented calculus. I have no idea, and who knows why we need calculus, but he invented calculus. He also created the binary system in computers. So he lived from 1640, he died 1716. So he actually created the binary system in computers. Now, for you computer geeks, you know that's really, really old, the binary system. Then, of course, another one I didn't mention, Sir Isaac Newton. What was Newton famous for? The apple! The apple that fell out of the tree, gravity. So Newton is the one who came up with gravity. So he's a physicist. That was the thing. He was born in 1643 to 1727. He was a mathematician, an astronomer, and an alchemist. His publication of the Principia is one of the most influential books in science to this day, still. It's one of the most influential books. It describes gravity and the 3 laws of motion, which I would concur with. So I think that's the only ones I wanted to mention that I do not have in your list on the book here. And there's only 2 women. The other woman who I didn't list is Julie Taymor. She actually is 1952 and is still alive today. She's an American director, actor, set designer, costume designer, and puppeteer. The reason why I didn't mention that, all of that has got to do with theater, so I didn't really count that. She's won 2 Tony Awards, Drama Desk Award for Outstanding Costume Design, an Emmy Award, and Academy Award nomination. That didn't really appeal to me, but that was it. There's only 2 women, her and the lady that got killed by oyster shells. So most of these, it's not meant to be just men can do this. I'm certain there's probably other women on there. I'm thinking about Helen Blavatsky could probably be written on there, although hers is mostly philosophy. Alice Bailey, same thing. Hers would be mostly philosophy. The woman that got lost at sea in the airplane. Amelia Earhart, but she was an aviator. I don't know if she did anything other than aviation. Helen Keller could be considered a polymath. I don't exactly know exactly the things that she did, but the fact that she was deaf, dumb, and blind and still able to make a contribution to me was intriguing enough. Now, let me go to some of the other people that I do have on here that you may know. So I'm just going to mention the names that I do know. How many know Leonardo da Vinci? What was he famous for? For painting. You said everything. Inventor. He was a painter, an inventor, an engineer, an astronomer, an anatomist, anatomist. He was an anatomist.
What is that?
He
drew the dissection.
showed the
Anatomy.
Wow.
relationship between
Yeah.
the golden mean and the different parts of the body.
So how many people have seen that picture of the man standing there like this in a
Yeah,
circle?
yeah.
That's Da Vinci right there. So he was very big on the anatomy. And he, as a matter of fact, I was looking to see if he actually did live in the same time, which he did. He and Michelangelo used to go to the graveyards and dig out the bodies and take them apart.
That's what
And
doctors did.
Take it apart and why it worked. Yes, so that's what he did. So he was a biologist, a geologist, study of rocks, a physicist, and an architect, which some people said too. Nicholas Copernicus we talked about already. Michelangelo, what was he famous for? Painting, but sculpting. He also had sculpting too. So I almost didn't put him on the list because painting, sculpt, that's kind of art, but he also was an architect, a poet, and an engineer, which I did not know he was an engineer.
I read a letter that he wrote to someone, and it was sort of in a way that you would have to know him to understand the letter. It was talking about his qualities, like almost like he was applying for a job, and he was saying, but he was putting himself, I don't know, it was hard to read.
I would say that would be him, probably. Has anybody ever seen the movie with Charlton Heston? What's it called? Where he plays Michelangelo? Oh, I know this name. And I just remember the Pope, every time he'd go by, he'd say, "When will it end?" And Michelangelo would say, "When it's finished." Because he had the cathedral all up in arms, and he'd be painting everywhere, and the Pope would be like, "When will this end?" And he'd just yell down, "When I'm finished." Huh?
The road?
No, that wasn't the name of the movie. I want to say it's the greatest, it wasn't the greatest story ever told, or it wasn't the 10 Commandments, it's, now it's going to haunt me. How about, I'm going to leave him. How many people know Benjamin Franklin? Oh, good. Finally, I went, oh, somebody not only I know, but I know what he did. So Benjamin Franklin, what was he? Politician.
Investing.
An
Inventor.
inventor.
Printer.
A printer.
Fireman.
A fireman. He was a scientist. He invented the bifocals. He invented wood-burning stoves. He was the first postmaster.
The almanac.
He invented the almanac.
Invented teeth.
He invented what? Teeth, false teeth. And one of
He
his,
was a diplomat as well.
he was a diplomat. One of his things, the contribution that he made, let's see, 1970, so he was in his 80s when he actually made most of these contributions, was his writings. He was a very well-educated individual. So that was Benjamin Franklin. Next one, Thomas Jefferson. What did he do? President.
He's a
Farmer.
Farmer.
orator, politician.
He was a politician. He was a horticulturist, so that's closer to a farmer. He was a horticulturist, an architect. He was an archaeologist. He was also a paleontologist and an inventor, as well as the third president of the United States and the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. Most of that came from him. And he also founded the University of Virginia, which I did not know. And then, let's see, I'm going through most of those guys I don't know. Oh, Walter Russell. How many people know who Walter Russell is?
Painter.
What was that?
A painter.
He was a painter.
Western painter.
Anything else? I like this guy. This is actually what set me off on looking for polymaths right now. So Walter Russell, George introduced me to Walter Russell years ago. He was a painter, a sculptor, an architect, a philosopher, and a physicist. Now, the thing that was intriguing about him, he did not have any teachers. He was all self-taught.
Wow.
He is most famous for a sculpture of Mark Twain's, where it's like 35 or 40 feet long. He has Mark Twain in the center, and every one of Mark Twain's characters is sculptured out in this huge, long sculpture. It's amazing. He had sculpted many presidents, many famous people. He is a writer, as I said. This is what launched me on looking for a polymath, because I was intrigued at this gentleman, and he is the first one that I came across that did not have any formal education. He was born in 1871 and died in 1963. So he lived in the Depression era and took himself out of school when he was 8 years old. He thought, no, I need to make a living education, and he was really actually bored with their education, so he decided to teach himself. Really made a tremendous contribution, and I don't want to talk too much about him because I'm going to talk about him next time. How about Albert Schweitzer? Everybody know Albert Schweitzer, the name Albert Schweitzer? What was he famous for? We all know the names, huh?
Publicist.
He was, what did you say, Michael?
Publicist.
Publisher.
Publisher, kind of. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1952 and spent the remaining years of his life campaigning against nuclear arms, nuclear weapons. But he was a German theologian, a philosopher, a musician, a physician, a humanitarian, and an activist. That's German. I remember reading of Albert Schweitzer. He died in 1965. But he was really one of the first ones to start campaigning against nuclear weapons. Let's see, let me go down to somebody else that I might know. No, that was it. That was my last one that I knew. The last one I did put on the list here was Jonathan Miller, and I really swayed on whether or not to put him on here. He was born in 1934. He is still alive. He's a British theater and opera director, an author, a television presenter, and a sculptor. And I thought, but then the last one got me. He's a doctor. That amazed me. He's a medical doctor, and he did all this other stuff as well. The one before him is also intriguing. So there's only 2 people on this list that are still alive. The other gentleman is Naquib. Naquib al-Attadas is an Islamic philosopher, a metaphysician, a theologian, an educator, an artist, architecture, and military science. So those are the only 2 on this list that are still currently alive. Other than that, everyone else has passed on, and which is why it went to that polymaths are a dying breed. Now, it's a long list, and I didn't tell you everything, but you will have this all in your handout. It's 5 pages today. I think it's 5 pages of information. I didn't want to overwhelm you with all the things that I came across, so I tried to keep everything just like 1 or 2 sentences, just so you know, and I figured if you were interested, you could go online and look them up just as I did. The thing that I went back to, though, was Aristotle. I really went back to him just because a lot of people referred back to him. He seemed to be one of the common threads. Philosophers, would go back to Aristotle and the idea that he really did make a large contribution. So what I ended with, which I'm not out of time yet, but what I ended with on the paper was I have a whole list of quotations by him. So what I thought I would do is just to have you do a little, since he said philosophy was the thing to strive for, I thought I would give you quotations and let you talk with your buddy and philosophize on what you think the meaning of those quotations are. That's how I thought we could enjoy our little polymath session here. So the first line is, love is composed of a single soul inhabiting 2 bodies. May I have your attention, please? So I'm going to stop there on that because I have a couple more minutes left and I wanted to do one more thing for polymath. As I stated, each of us could be a polymath. We've all excelled, or many of us excelled in more than one areas in our lives. So what I'd like you to do is have a conversation with your buddy now. Unfortunately, you guys know each other. Have a conversation with your buddy and talk about, at least, if you can come up with, at least 5 different things that you have done. Maybe not excelled at, but at least 5 different things that you have done in your life. Go ahead. May I have your attention, please? So I was watching you guys struggle trying to find things that you would do. Some people didn't, some people did. I sat here and I was thinking, well, you know, I could name off every job I've had that could consider me to be a polymath, but I don't feel that is a science or a section like the ones that of history. So the idea that I came up with, for me, I only came up with 4. A philosopher, but I include public speaking and writing in that because that's all part of the philosophy, Omega, and the newsletters that we write, the Monday night workshops, the deliveries of the programs. I was a massage therapist for 23 years, so that's different from philosophy. You could put counseling on that one too, because you're a counselor when you're a massage therapist. I was a graphic designer, which is drastically different from other things as well. So that was a self-taught. I did that for about 10 years. And then dabbled in photography, never really took it to the limit, but I have some great shots that, you know, I could sell. So photography, and that's what I ended up with, just 4. And not that I'm disappointed, but I am. I have been thinking lately, when I was a kid, I was really good at violin. So I've been thinking about lately of picking that back up again. My stepson has a violin that he doesn't play anymore, so I think I'm going to confiscate it from his room. But that would be music, but I don't think I would excel at that. I thought about Torkham, who a lot of people know. George would correlate Torkham. He taught the Ageless Wisdom teachings up in Sedona. I actually went online to see if I can consider him a polymath, and you can't. He is just really a philosopher and a musician. But the thing is, when he was a musician, he played like 6 different instruments. So he played the piano, the cello, the violin, something called an OBD or something, I don't know. He was from Persia, so I'm thinking it's one of the Persian instruments. And then as a philosopher, he had tons and tons of books. He's written well over 100 books on the Ageless Wisdom teachings. Truly a gentle man. I met him once. He was a very sweet man. But even someone like that I consider to be a good contribution, it doesn't qualify as a polymath. And so, you know, my little competition came out and said, oh yeah, I'm going to make myself do 5 so I could be on that list. And, you know, we don't want to do that. That's not what it's all about. Yes, Michael?
Wouldn't you consider yourself a humanitarian?
I don't know, because when I think about humanitarians, I would consider George a humanitarian because he truly, I really actually wrote this in here, that I don't think we'll see the true effects of his contribution in my lifetime. I don't think so. So I'm not sure. I would consider myself a humanitarian. Yes, I focus on making a contribution to humanity, but that I threw in with the philosophy of the public trainings. Do I do it in every day of my life? I'm not sure. I want to say yes, but you know, when I want my Starbucks and you're very slow in front of me, I'm not very humanitarian-ish. I'm get out of my way. So I don't know.
So if you get rid of the Starbucks,
No. I am attached.
you could be
Don't
that
try
much
to make
further.
something unequal to be equal.
Mark, you need to help her with this.
She's on her own.
But I would say anybody who has the search for philosophy or desire, all of you would be humanitarians. The idea that,
You would. Okay, thank you.
yes. I wouldn't throw myself in that, the search for. But I was thinking about how I read so much, and I went and tried to go back to find some of the things that I was inspired by, and couldn't collect it all back together again. But I remember one section that I did read, that it was the tireless effort to continue to strive forward was something that I thought was a theme, that not to be settled just to be compliant, that there had to be more, to always strive and question. That's a theme that I found. They may not have said it, but it seems to be apparent that once they accomplished one thing, it wasn't satisfactory, that's it, I'm done, it was on to the next. So what I thought I would do is first check to see, is this an interesting enough topic for me to do a second one or not?
Oh, yeah.
Yes?
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
I didn't bore you with all the details?
No.
Okay. Drink Starbucks next time. Thinking is what I'd like to get you to do. So then I will consider that I'm going to probably do the next Monday night workshop will be the part 2, and I'll probably take it to part 3 just to go through, because there really are a few individuals that I want to make sure some of their philosophy is written down, because that's what I started out looking for, was their philosophy. Well, thanks for letting me play with this topic. I really do feel inspired that this is going to be my thesis. No one can steal this, even you on YouTube. Well, good night, everyone. Have a pleasant night. We'll see you in
Thank
2
you very
weeks.
much.
Thank you.